This is a real interview, translated into English. You can find the original story via the link in the description. Hello, my name is Catherine, and I'm currently living in Greece, in the city of Thessaloniki. I've been here for almost a month now. I moved from St. Petersburg, and overall, everything worked out well. The relocation process was arranged with your help, and at this stage, I already feel settled, at least in everyday things. The decision to move was made last autumn, around late October or early November. At that time, we were comparing different agencies and options. In the end, we chose your team because the offer really suited us, both in price and in what was included. It felt like the most realistic option, and thankfully, it worked out the way we expected. We started preparing and submitting the documents in November last year. That's when the whole process began. Of course, there were some small moments where we ran into problems, but overall, it was just part of the normal adjustment period before moving abroad. I chose Greece mainly for practical reasons. I was looking for the most budget-friendly option, and in the current situation, that really matters. Not all countries issue visas to Russian students, and not all of them offer the level of support that Greece does. Here, higher education is free. In many cases, students also get free meals, accommodation, and sometimes even textbooks. Compared to other EU countries, Greece is one of the most affordable choices, and for me, that worked out well. I'm 23, so this decision wasn't connected to school. After graduating, I tried studying at university in Russia several times, but I never completed a degree. First, I studied veterinary medicine for 2 years, but I realized that the profession wasn't for me. Later, I switched to linguistics, translation and interpretation. Although I studied on a state-funded place, the quality of education disappointed me. I liked the field itself, but I didn't feel that the university gave me strong practical skills. I didn't see a clear future there, and at some point, I ran into problems with motivation. I studied linguistics in Russia for about a year, but by then, I had already started preparing documents for Greece and understood that I wouldn't continue my studies back home. In Greece, I applied for the same field, English linguistics and philology. All documents were submitted remotely, and the coordinators handled the process. I only needed to choose and rank 20 faculties by priority. I didn't get into my first choice on Corfu, but I was accepted to my second option, English linguistics at the University of Athens. For me, this result worked out perfectly. My top 5 choices were all in the same field, and any of them would have been a good outcome during this adjustment period. The document preparation process wasn't easy for me. I wouldn't call it extremely difficult, but I definitely ran into problems along the way, and some things didn't go as I expected. I started collecting documents in October to November 2023, but I was only able to send the full package closer to April. So the paperwork took several months and became part of a long adjustment period. A lot of time went into preparing, checking, and fixing details. In the end, everything worked out, but it required patience and careful attention at every step. I ran into problems with my birth certificate back in Russia. Greek universities require nationality to be stated in this document to confirm that the applicant doesn't have Greek roots. In my case, nationality wasn't specified at birth. My parents left that line blank. Because of this, I needed to change the document through the registry office. In theory, it sounded simple, but in reality, I quickly ran into problems. In St. Petersburg, none of the registry offices agreed to change the certificate. I contacted several of them, and everywhere I was told the same thing. The document couldn't be changed. The only official option was to go to court, but that turned into another long adjustment period. The court didn't even review my case, and returned the documents with a formal refusal. At that point, it became clear that this path wouldn't work out. After that, my coordinators suggested a different approach. Instead of my own birth certificate, we submitted my parents' birth certificates, where their nationality was clearly stated. This allowed us to prove that I don't have Greek roots. In the end, this solution worked out. For now, everything is fine, and the issue hasn't come up again, although I understand it was part of a difficult adjustment period during the process. I also want to explain what an apostille is, because this part often causes confusion and people run into problems with it. An apostille is an official stamp that confirms a document is authentic and valid abroad. Without it, many institutions simply won't accept your paperwork, so this step has to work out properly. Different documents require apostilles from different authorities. My school certificate was apostilled by the Ministry of Education, the notarized power of attorney by the Ministry of Justice, and civil registry documents, like a birth certificate, through the registry archive. Luckily, I didn't run into problems with the apostilles themselves. The process was clear, but it definitely added to the overall adjustment period of document preparation. The main downside is time and cost. One apostille costs about 2,500 rubles, and I needed several of them. On top of that, processing times vary. Some documents are ready in a few days, others take longer. Because of this, the apostille stage can easily slow things down and extend the adjustment period, so it's important to plan ahead to make sure everything works out in time. Apart from that, I ran into problems with sending the documents to Greece. At that time, regular mail from Russia simply didn't work for Greece. In theory, private delivery services like CDEK were an option, but in reality, this solution didn't work out for us. It's very expensive, and there are no guaranteed delivery times. Documents can take 20 days, 30 days, or even more than a month, and you can't really rely on the process. For us, this option didn't work out because the documents had to arrive by a specific deadline, and speed was critical, especially during the early adjustment period. In the end, the coordinators helped us find another solution. They found a person who was flying from Moscow to Thessaloniki. I sent my documents from St. Petersburg to Moscow via CDEK, and then they were handed over personally at the airport to the person flying to Greece. After that, the coordinators received them directly in Thessaloniki. It sounds complicated, but in our situation, it was the only reliable way to meet the deadline and make sure everything arrived on time. CDEK does deliver documents to Greece, but the cost is very high, around 10,000 to 20,000 rubles. And without guaranteed delivery dates, it's a risky option when timing really matters. When it comes to the language, I started preparing in advance so that things would work out more smoothly later. While I was still in Russia and dealing with the documents, I didn't want to waste time. I knew the process could be slow, so I decided to use that period productively and started learning Greek online. I chose courses connected to Aristotle University. They offer 3-month programs covering A1 and A2. The idea was simple. Arrive in Greece with at least a basic level and avoid running into problems right after the move. Because of this preparation, when I came to Thessaloniki, I wasn't placed in a beginner group. I was assigned to a higher level instead, which made the adjustment period much easier. Now I continue studying Greek in Thessaloniki. I started at A2, and that worked out well for me. This year, there were no B1 groups starting in autumn, but that wasn't an issue. I needed revision anyway, so A2 felt like the most logical choice. Overall, learning the language in advance really helped. It reduced stress during the adjustment period and made the whole transition feel more manageable. I studied Greek online while I was still in Russia. and overall it worked out well, but it was also quite challenging. At that time, I was studying full-time at university and working at the same time. Because of that, it was easy to run into problems with time and energy. The first part of the course, A1, worked out smoothly for me. I finished it successfully and got around 9 out of 10 overall. The second part was much harder. Grammar became more complex, vocabulary grew fast, and I started to run into problems keeping up. When language learning is your main focus, these courses usually work out fine. But when you combine them with studies or work, the intensity can slow you down a lot. That's why I think online Greek courses work out best when language learning is your main priority. If you also study or work, you run into problems simply because there isn't enough time. Starting too late, for example in the final year of school, usually makes the adjustment period much more stressful. It's not useless, but the pressure is high. If the goal is to move and study in Greece, starting earlier helps the adjustment period work out more calmly, ideally in 9th or 10th grade. Another issue is the schedule. Many courses have daytime classes and long lessons with a lot of homework. In that situation, it's very easy to run into problems combining everything. So overall, learning Greek online works out, but only if you realistically assess your workload. That makes the adjustment period much smoother later on. I traveled to Greece through Istanbul. First, I flew from St. Petersburg to Istanbul, and then I went from Istanbul to Thessaloniki by bus. Overall, this route worked out best for me. There were options to fly the whole way, but most of them involved very long layovers, or were much more expensive if the timing was convenient. Since I was on a tight budget, I decided that the bus option worked out better. My flight from St. Petersburg to Istanbul cost about 62,000 rubles. I bought the ticket at the last moment because my visa situation was unclear until the very end. Because of that, I even missed the first week of my language courses. One of those moments when you run into problems simply because things are out of your control. If you buy tickets in advance, the same route usually works out cheaper, around 70 to 80,000 rubles. The flight to Istanbul took about 4 hours. Flying from Istanbul to Thessaloniki would take about an hour and a half, but by bus, the trip is much longer. I spent around 13 hours on the bus. It wasn't very comfortable, but it worked out and was manageable. Financially, the bus is a good solution if you're on a tight budget. It's 2 or even 3 times cheaper than flying, so in that sense, it definitely works out. The bus itself was very basic. There was no Wi-Fi or toilet, even though companies often say there is. Still, there were stops along the way, so you could manage without running into problems. The main difficulty was that the bus was completely full, which made the trip feel cramped. After many passengers got off, it became much more comfortable, and the rest of the journey worked out fine. Because I had a night flight before that, I slept most of the time. I did enjoy the views for a couple of hours while we were still traveling through Turkey. That part was actually a nice start to the adjustment period in a new country. When I arrived in Greece, I brought about 1,000 euros in cash. The rest of my money was on bank cards. I prepared everything in advance and opened a bank card in Tajikistan, so transfers from Russia worked out smoothly. Many students did the same with cards from Kazakhstan, and overall the system works out quite fast. I transferred money from my Russian card to the Tajik one, and then paid or withdrew cash in Greece without major issues. Both Tajik and Kazakh cards work out here, but it's important to check your bank conditions in advance so you don't run into problems. For example, my flatmate didn't check the fees and lost almost 16,000 rubles just on withdrawal commissions. That's why it's crucial to know how much your bank charges abroad, and which ATMs work out better. From experience, Alpha Bank ATMs usually work out cheaper than some others. The coordinators also help a lot. They know where it works out best to withdraw money, because everyone shares real cases where people ran into problems, or, nabarot, avoided them. There's also quick pay, similar to Zolotaya Korona. You can transfer money without commission, which works out well if you're on a tight budget, but you need to withdraw cash at a specific office in the city center. Before moving, we were added to a group chat with other students from Russia. It helped a lot during the adjustment period. Visas, documents, consulates, all of that. After arriving, we met in person, went to a tavern together, and now we often see each other at courses or in the cafeteria. It really works out socially, and you don't feel like a stranger during the adjustment period. There are also many Russian-speaking students on the language courses, so the community is quite active. That also works out well when you're still in your adjustment period. I arrived in Thessaloniki on October 5th, late at night. I missed the first week of classes because they started on September 30th, but overall, everything worked out in the end. When I arrived in Thessaloniki, my accommodation was already planned in advance, which worked out really well. For the first few days, I stayed in a hostel. I arrived by bus late at night and got to the main bus station around midnight. The coordinators ordered a taxi for me, and I went straight to the hostel without running into problems. Usually, if students arrive during the day, the coordinators meet them in person at the airport or bus station. In my case, because it was so late, a taxi was the simplest solution, and everything worked out smoothly. I didn't stay in the hostel long. The next day, we moved into an apartment. The coordinators handled everything: searching for the apartment, talking to the real estate agent and the landlord, and sorting out all the details. This worked out especially well during the first days, when everything feels new. My role was minimal. I just came to sign the documents. Not having to deal with all this on my own helped a lot during the adjustment period and made the move much calmer, especially since I was still on a tight budget and didn't want extra stress. The apartment we rent worked out really well for us. It's quite large, about 100 square meters, and 3 of us live here. Me, another girl from St. Petersburg, and a guy from Moscow. We arrived later than the others because of visa delays, so the coordinators placed us together, and it worked out conveniently. The layout is a bit unusual. Officially, it's a 3-bedroom apartment, but in reality it feels closer to 4 rooms. There are 3 separate bedrooms, plus a shared living room and a kitchen. One bedroom is connected to the living room, but it can be fully closed, so we didn't run into problems with privacy. We also have 2 big balconies and 2 bathrooms, which makes everyday life much easier. For 3 people, this setup really works out well. The apartment itself is fine. Compared to Russia, many Greek apartments feel a bit outdated, more like places from 15 to 20 years ago. At first, during the adjustment period, it felt unusual, almost like living at a relative's place. But everything essential is here, so it didn't become a real issue. The owner left all the basic furniture and household items, which is not very common in Greece. Many apartments are rented completely empty, so in this sense, we didn't run into problems and were quite lucky. Of course, we still bought some things ourselves: a kettle, bed linen, pillows, blankets. Some people bring these from Russia, others don't, especially if they're on a tight budget. In the end, it really depends on personal comfort and priorities. From my own experience, I can definitely recommend bringing a few basic things with you when you move for a longer period. I took a set of bed linen from Russia: sheets, pillowcases, simple things. When you arrive in a new country, everything feels unfamiliar at first. During the adjustment period, even small details matter. Making the bed with your own linen helped me feel calmer and more at home right away. I also brought towels with me. Because of that, when I moved into the apartment, everything worked out smoothly. I could just go to sleep on the first night without extra stress. My roommates didn't bring anything like that and had to use what the landlord left. Luckily, there was at least something, because many people I know ran into problems when they moved into completely empty apartments. In those situations, you either rush to the store immediately or somehow manage for the first few nights. These things aren't extremely expensive, around 50 to 100 euros, but if you're on a tight budget, it's better to plan ahead. Also, bed linen in Greece is noticeably more expensive than in Russia, so bringing at least one set really works out in your favor. For the first days, this makes life much easier. You can take fewer clothes, but bed linen is something I would definitely pack. As for my schedule, I didn't start studying immediately. I moved into the apartment on Saturday, spent Sunday settling in, and on Monday, everything worked out. I went to classes already feeling more organized. For me, the adjustment period in the apartment took about 2 or 3 weeks. At first, we were constantly busy, cleaning, washing everything, and buying basic household items. There were many small things to take care of, and only after that, the apartment started to feel more like home. Some people ran into problems that were much more serious. A few students didn't have electricity for about a week and a half. In Greece, when you move into a new apartment, utility contracts are often transferred to the tenant. Until everything is officially switched, the apartment can be left without electricity. Because hot water here depends on electricity, that also means no hot water at all. So daily life becomes quite uncomfortable. We were lucky. For us, everything worked out faster. We had no electricity for only 3 or 4 days. During that time, we charged our phones and power banks in nearby cafes. We would order something small and sit there charging all our devices. So in the first days, we spent almost every evening in the same cafe near the apartment. It wasn't ideal, but it worked out. And during the adjustment period, we just accepted it as part of settling in. One thing I would definitely recommend to everyone during the adjustment period is bringing power banks with you. Ideally, it's better to have 2 power banks. I chose 2 smaller ones, 10,000 milliamp hours each, instead of one heavy 20,000 milliamp hour battery. It's simply more practical to carry them around. In the evenings, I charged all my power banks and devices, and during the next day, I could recharge my phone several times, even when there were no sockets nearby. That really worked out well in everyday situations. I've heard stories from other students who ran into problems. One guy arrived in a new country, took a bus somewhere without a power bank, and his phone died. He didn't know the language, didn't know the area, and didn't even know his exact address. And it was already getting late. To avoid situations like that, it's important to always keep your power banks charged and with you. During the first days after arrival, this simple thing can really work out as a safety net and make the whole adjustment period much calmer. I also realized that I hadn't mentioned how much we pay for the apartment, and this was an important part of the adjustment period. At first, we planned to rent the apartment just for 2 people, me and another girl. The rent was supposed to be 550 euros per month, which came to 275 euros per person, not including utilities. In the end, a third person moved in with us, and the rent became 600 euros total. That worked out to 200 euros per person, which is honestly very cheap. Even by Russian standards, that's a good price. For Thessaloniki, it really worked out well. In general, I would recommend planning around 300 euros per month for rent here, because that's closer to the average. When it comes to utilities, we were quite lucky. The landlord didn't transfer the utility accounts to us. They stayed in his name. The reason we didn't have electricity for a few days wasn't because of us. He had just bought the apartment and was still sorting things out. If the accounts had also needed to be transferred to us, we probably would have run into problems and waited even longer. For now, we simply pay him the rent, and when utility bills arrive, we transfer the money to him, and he pays everything himself. So far, we haven't paid utilities yet. As far as I understand, in Greece, these bills usually come once every few months, and you pay for several months at once. When I finally started attending the language courses, it became clear very quickly that they are extremely intensive, especially during the adjustment period. We study 5 days a week, usually 3 to 4 academic hours per day. Classes start at 9 o'clock in the morning, go until about 11 o'clock, then we have a short break and continue for another hour and a half. The schedule is quite tight, and you really need to sort things out in your daily routine to keep up. After classes, you still have homework. If I only do the basic tasks, it takes around 30 minutes. But if I want to really understand the material, revise everything, and practice more, it can easily take 2 to 3 hours. Otherwise, the next day you might run into problems. Vocabulary doesn't stick, grammar feels confusing, and you just sit there feeling lost. With this pace, free time becomes limited. It doesn't disappear completely, but you quickly realize that you came here to study. If you want real progress, you have to invest time. And when you do, it eventually works out. As for the language itself, Greek is taught mostly in Greek. At the very beginning, teachers use some English to help with basic understanding, but already after a few lessons, they switch almost completely to Greek. English is used later only for very difficult words, usually at B1 to B2 level, when explanations in Greek alone are not enough. When I moved, my English level was around B1 to B2. So, understanding explanations in English wasn't a problem for me. When teachers give instructions or explain something, I usually follow without difficulty, which really helps during the adjustment period. For students who don't speak English at all, the start is much harder. We have people like that in our group, and they clearly run into problems at the beginning. Very often, their friends have to translate explanations from English into Russian so they can understand what's going on in class. That's why I think English is something you really need to sort things out before moving. Even a basic level, A2 or B1, makes a huge difference, especially in the first months. English helps a lot, not only with studying, but also with everyday communication here in Greece. As for Greek compared to English, for me, Greek is definitely much harder. Honestly, I'm surprised when people say they learn Greek in just 1 year. With intensive study, English can be learned in a year or even faster because the grammar is much simpler. Greek works differently. Even after a year of studying here, you don't reach a real B2 level. The exam is focused more on everyday life, basic communication and survival in the country. But when students later start university, this level often isn't enough to fully understand lectures and academic material. That's when you really feel how much effort this language requires before everything finally works out. My first impression of Thessaloniki was generally positive. It's a comfortable city to live in, and during the first weeks, my adjustment period went quite smoothly. Of course, compared to Moscow or St. Petersburg, it's much smaller. The population is around 350,000 people, even though it's the second largest city in Greece. What really stood out to me was the climate. Compared to St. Petersburg, it's much warmer here. When I arrived in October, it honestly felt like summer, which made settling in easier. Even now, in early November, the weather still works out very well for everyday life. In the mornings and evenings, it's cooler, around 10 to 12 degrees. But during the day, especially in the sun, it warms up to about 20 to 22 degrees. There's also a lot of sun. In the whole month I've been here, it hasn't rained once. As for greenery, Thessaloniki isn't a very green city. There aren't many parks, which was a bit unexpected. We even discussed this during language courses and tried to sort things out by asking locals, but the options are quite limited. So when we want to go for a walk, we usually head to the seafront promenade. It's long, pleasant, and full of cafes and nice places to sit. A few times, we also went outside the city to the sea. That's where the city really works out best for relaxing and taking a break. When it comes to architecture, I think it's very personal. After St. Petersburg, Thessaloniki doesn't feel especially impressive to me. There are no grand avenues or iconic buildings like in Russian historical city centers, so visually it takes some time to get used to. At the same time, the city center has many pleasant and interesting places. Aristotle's Square is especially nice, and there are quite a few old buildings that are clearly several centuries old. In some areas, you really feel the history, and that helps the overall picture make sense. Overall, Thessaloniki looks well-kept and comfortable. I'd say it definitely works out better than many regional cities in Russia in terms of atmosphere and everyday life. I haven't been to Athens yet. So far, I've only been in Thessaloniki. Maybe later, during holidays or a longer break, I'll visit Athens. But for now, I haven't planned it, and I'm still focusing on settling into my current adjustment period. Emotionally, the first month after moving was quite intense, but it wasn't scary. The coordinators gave a lot of support. They helped with everyday things, from where it's cheaper to shop to what simply doesn't make sense to buy. Still, there was a moment when I felt completely overwhelmed. There were too many tasks at once, not enough time, and everything felt urgent. That phase was stressful, and it definitely took some energy to push through it. Now, about a month later, things have clearly settled down. We've managed to sort things out, life has become more structured, and there's already a clear daily routine. We go to classes calmly and understand how everything works. At this point, I feel like I've got used to life here. Everything feels organized, predictable, and much more relaxed compared to the first weeks. Overall, I think there's one more important thing to mention, especially for future students. When it comes to language courses, it's crucial not to fall behind. You need to study regularly and not let things slide, even for a short time. As soon as you pause, the material starts to pile up very fast. Small gaps appear, and later it becomes harder to sort things out. At some point, it just stops making sense, and that's when people feel stressed and overwhelmed. From my experience, it's much better to study a little every day than to spend whole weekends trying to fix everything at once. When you stay consistent, you get used to the pace, and learning feels more manageable. So my main advice is simple. Don't relax too much. Keep moving step by step, and give yourself time to settle down into a steady study routine. My name is Artyom, and I've done around 2,000 interviews with people who moved to completely different countries. I hope you enjoyed this story, and that it maybe helped you improve your English. Don't forget to subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.